The Barbarian War, Chapters 35 and 36, Grief Between the Stars. Chapter 35. The worst of the crisis had passed, but cleaning up the mess left by the minister's coup would be the work of months, perhaps even years. Leandra had fobbed off as much of it as she could to others, instead focusing her efforts on what was coming. It wasn't the first time she'd found herself in this position, but to see the efforts of the last 10 years just swept away almost brought tears to her eyes. They had worked so hard to avoid this, and it was all for nothing. Leandra drew herself up and put those fears aside. This war wasn't over yet, and she still had a few cards left to play. It didn't matter that she'd put everything she'd had into the pot, and found herself staring at a pair of deuces. She'd play this hand out to the bitter end, and accept the consequences, come what may. The doors to the chamber burst open as one of the communications staff came running towards her. "Prime Minister! You must come quickly!" he cried out to her. "We are receiving a transmission!" "What transmission?" she demanded, rising to her feet. "It is good to see you again, Prime Minister," Nasat said politely, as Leandra leaned back in her chair. "And you as well, Marshal," she replied, eyeing his surroundings. "Interesting company you're keeping these days." "They are our allies, Prime Minister, sworn to the banner of Jiaj Guyaz. He has vowed to remove Chugaz Uidan from power by any means necessary," Nasat explained. "I see," Leandra said carefully, steepling her fingers. "And Admiral Fujimoto? The fleet?" "We do not know," Nasat said quietly. "Many were lost. Perhaps all." The Prime Minister took that in, without revealing her thoughts. "I was told you had a message for me." "Yes, Prime Minister," Nasat said after a moment. "Chugaz Uidan and the bulk of the Konhim fleet are en route to the old triumvirate as we speak. We believe they intend to begin their assault at the Chenur cluster." "Believe," she said pointedly. "Do you have evidence to support this?" Nasat grimaced. "Not as such, Prime Minister, but we are all in agreement it is the most likely target." Leandra didn't move a muscle, but it seemed as if her entire demeanor changed in a heartbeat. Her eyes narrowed as she fixed him with a piercing stare. "And you think we should position our forces there to head them off, is that correct?" "Yes, Prime Minister," he replied, somewhat puzzled by her response. "It seems the most prudent course of action." She nodded slowly, but there was a cool calculation to the gesture. "Do your allies agree with your assessment as well?" "They do, Prime Minister," he said in confusion. "Is there something wrong?" "Just this," she said darkly, leaning forward. "Why should I believe a word you've said?" Nasat blinked in surprise. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me!" she fired back. "We haven't had contact with anyone from the fleet in weeks. You tell me Admiral Fujimoto is likely dead, after you asked my support to remove her from command. You yourself are transmitting from the bridge of a Konhim vessel, our enemy, in case you've forgotten. And it was elements of the old triumvirate races, including yours, that attacked Earth. So as I see it, there are two possibilities. One, that you have been taken prisoner by the Konhim and are now speaking under duress, or two, that you have been an active co-conspirator with the former ministers from the very beginning." Her nostrils flared as she glared at him. "One makes you a pawn. The other makes you a traitor. So you tell me, Marshal, why should I believe anything that comes out of your mouth?" His jaw dropped in shock. Nasat struggled to respond, but words failed him as Leandra pressed her attack home. "You tell me to rush our forces to the Chenur cluster, without a shred of evidence to support it, I might add, in order to prevent an invasion. Let me tell you what I think is a more likely scenario, that the Konhim will attack anywhere but Chenur. I think this is nothing but a wild goose chase, a ruse designed to render our remaining forces useless." She gripped the armrests tightly, enough so that her knuckles showed white, as her eyes burned into his. "So I ask for the third time, why should I believe you?" Nasat looked desperately around for support, bowing his head gratefully as Musashi stepped into view. Prime Minister, I can assure you that everything Marshal Nassat said is accurate. In fact, Leandra cut him off with a wave of her hand. Every point I just made could apply equally to you, she said curtly. Earth has a long and rich tradition of humans betraying their own kind. Prime Minister, Leandra, I beg you listen to me, Nassat implored her. You have known me for 10 years. It was you that insisted I take on the role I have, despite my repeated objections. Were I the traitor you claim? Would I have not sought out those promotions? In fact, you did, Marshal, she coldly reminded him. You may not have started out intending to betray the Tetrarchy, but people change. Yours as well as mine. Nassat closed his eyes. Rykret was aboard one of those ships, he said softly. Even now I do not know if she is alive or dead. Yesterday I buried my mentor. He died saving my life. Slowly he opened his eyes, pleading with her. My very children claim you as family. Forget everything your head is telling you, and listen with your heart. You know me, Leandra. Know me better than I know myself. I would sooner die than become what you claim, and if you look deep within yourself, you know that to be true. Please, help me. Help me save our people! All our people! Something in her expression softened as he spoke, but as he finished, she slowly shook her head. I'm sorry, Nassat, but I can't. Not without proof. I'm responsible for trillions of lives, and I won't risk their safety purely on your say-so. Then at least put out scouts in the cluster's vicinity, he beseeched her. Something that will give you enough advanced warning when Chugaz Uidan's forces draw near. Leandra's professional mask was firmly back in place. Unless you have some shred of evidence to support your claims, she said at last, this conversation is concluded. Good day. And with that, her image disappeared from the display. Nassat could only stare at the blank screen in dismay, as Giage regarded him with sympathy. So, it would seem we are both traitors, he said without humor. He looked up at the Konhim, his eyes wide and desperate. How could she believe that of me? He asked. Giage sighed. Nassat, she made the right decision. What? He all but shouted. How can you say that? You know it isn't true. It doesn't matter what I know, Giage said evenly. You must consider it from her perspective. Every point she made was a valid one. Can you honestly tell me that if your positions were reversed, you would not react as she did? Nassat thrust out his chin defiantly. I hope I would remember to trust my friends, he said with a hint of anger. Giage snorted in dry amusement. That is your first mistake. At the level you and I are at now, we have no friends, only temporary allies, supplicants, and enemies. I refuse to be that cynical, Nassat shot back as Giage barked out a laugh. Not cynical, realistic, he chuckled as Klaxon suddenly began to scream. What is happening? Giage demanded as his tactical officer looked up at him. Unidentified ships on an intercept course, the officer shouted, as Dauntless cleared for battle. Chapter 36. There was a moment's hesitation as Giage looked to Ajum Ganach. Dauntless was his ship, after all. But the question of command was decided by a simple gesture. Ajum bowed his head and stepped aside, leaving the way clear, as Giage all but leapt into the command chair and turned to the tactical officer. What do we have? He demanded, as the officer threw the plot onto the main display. Readings are indeterminate, Dayaksh, he said respectfully, but there appears to be from 10 to 20 vessels bearing down on our position. They are somehow managing to jam our sensors. Nassat and Musashi stared at the screen and then turned to one another. Do you think it could be? Musashi said in disbelief. It must, Nassat said excitedly, before facing Giage. It has to be Admiral Fujimoto's fleet, he informed him, as a surge of hope filled his chest. Perhaps, Giage replied, as he gazed at the display. It is also possible this is one of Chugaz Uidan's tricks. Without missing a beat, he turned back to tactical. Ready all weapons and prepare to fire. What? No! Nassat shouted as he rushed to Giage's side. Let me speak to her, he begged. I can convince her to stand down. Can you? He asked coolly. If that is Fujimoto, then there is an excellent chance she will react as the Prime Minister did. More so, in fact, seeing as the very ships she now faces are the same ones that devastated her command. There is a very good chance you will not be believed. I must try, Nasat pleaded. My wife is on one of those ships. Giage grimaced and then glanced at the tactical officer. How long until we are in weapons range? 30 seconds at current velocities, the officer responded. The Diaksh gave a curt nod and mashed down a button on his armrest. That's how long you have to convince her, he said grimly, or until she opens fire. Nasat wasted no time with pleasantries. Admiral Fujimoto, this is Marshal Nasat. We are aboard one of the Konim vessels you are now attacking. Stand down immediately. Nothing. She thinks it's a trick, Musashi said quietly. Probably thinks we're all dead. 15 seconds, Giage informed them, watching the countdown. Unless you can stop her, I'll have no choice but to fire. Nasat racked his brain, trying to think of something, anything, that would make her listen. All he needed was a minute, but unless she gave that to him. Your father! He shouted in sudden inspiration. You said he would have liked me, and that his biggest regret was that you did not share his faith. He perished in the attack on Earth, in the city of... He ground to a halt, struggling to recall the name of the human city. He remembered reading the report of the metropolitan centers lost, but that had been weeks ago, and the human names felt strange to his tongue. 5 seconds, Giage intoned, as the ship's officer prepared to launch weapons. Dear Creator, what was it? It was similar to another city in name. He could almost see it. Kyoto! Nasat exclaimed as the human words suddenly came to him. Helene, please stand down. Giage raised his hand as he prepared to give the order, when the attacking ship suddenly swerved hard to port, avoiding the Konhim vessels. Nasat held his breath as the Konhim leader fixed his attention on the screen, watching for any hint of aggressive intent, before finally lowering his hand. Tactical, maintain weapons lock, but do not fire, he ordered, as the Sartuar marshal breathed a sigh of relief. It is only a temporary reprieve, Giage said coldly. Unless she fully states her intentions to be peaceful, I will fire, he vowed without hesitation. Moments later, the communications officer looked up. Diaksh, I am receiving a transmission from one of the enemy ships. They wish to speak to Marshal Nasat. On screen, he ordered. The image wavered as the tactical plot was replaced by the likeness of Admiral Fujimoto, Nasat almost gasping in shock at her appearance. Her face was heavily bandaged, covering one of her eyes, and her normally pristine uniform was stained and torn. But worst of all was the empty sleeve pinned up at her shoulder. You have 10 seconds to prove your claim before I destroy you, she snarled. Nasat swallowed and stepped forward with Musashi at his side. Admiral, it is all true. The Konhim have split into 2 camps. The loyalists, still following the flag of Chugaz Uidan, and the rebels, under Giage Guyaz. He turned to indicate Giage, still sitting in his command chair, eyeing her without expression. Chugaz Uidan's forces are headed for Tetrarchy space as we speak. Dissension in the ranks does not automatically make them our allies, Nasat, she fired back. Why should I trust him, or you, for that matter? I could say the same of you, Admiral, Giage said darkly. I have not forgotten how you treat your guests. The two glared at one another as Nasat stepped in between them. Admiral, please, let us return to your ship. We can discuss this in greater detail and show you our recordings. He paused for a moment and then asked gently, Admiral, may I speak to Rakret? Is she unharmed? Helene's face was carved from granite. I will consider your request on 2 conditions. First, that all individuals transporting over are unarmed. Agreed, Nasat said in a rush, nodding his head, drawing sullen looks from those around him. And second, that Giage transports over as well, she demanded. The Diaksh rose to his feet. And become your hostage once more? I think not, he all but spit out. If you think for 1 second I'll allow you to remain in command after what your fleet has done to mine, you are very much mistaken, she said through gritted teeth. Allow? Giage barked out a harsh laugh. What makes you believe you are in a position to allow me anything? He growled back, as once again Nasat watched the two of them ready to go to battle over a point of honor. The last time he had witnessed them preparing to go for one another's throats, he had attempted sweet reason to sway them, and for the most part, he had been successful. But the young naive sergeant who had played peacemaker between them was long gone, and the sortuar who stood before them now was cut from very different cloth. Enough! Nasat thundered, glaring in fury at each of them in turn. Two heads swiveled as one, as Giage and Helene both stared at him in shock. Are both of you so determined, so filled with hate, that you are willing to destroy each other? He demanded. Fine. We can easily arrange that. We can transport you both somewhere, with a stack of weapons high enough to satisfy both your murderous urges, and let you slaughter each other. Nasat scowled angrily at each of them in turn, and to his amazement, each of them managed to look somewhat abashed. He pointed his finger in what he thought was the direction of the Tetrarchy, allowing them to taste his full and righteous wrath. There is where the enemy lies, he glowered, and the two of you are handing him victory. Have you learned nothing? He wants you divided! His chest heaved as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Neither of your fleets can survive against him alone, and I will not lie. Even together, our odds of success are slim. Nasat drew himself up as he faced each of them in turn. But we have faced greater odds before and prevailed. So I refuse to surrender to fear and hate. So make your choice here now. Will you stand together, or will you battle to the death? The silence on Dauntless Bridge was deafening, as those in attendance stared at the sortuar in stupefaction. Whisper grinned as if he had witnessed the funniest pratfall ever, and even Tango gave him a smug smile of satisfaction. But Nasat refused to budge, standing his ground as he waited for their response. I am willing to come to your vessel, Admiral, Giage said at last, breaking the silence. I will even come unarmed, but I will have 4 warriors at my side, and they will be armed. His eyes narrowed as he carefully enunciated each following word. I will not remain as your prisoner. I will return here after we finish our discussion, where I will continue to command these ships. Helene's posture was as still as a steel bulkhead, as she eyed Giage with suspicion. Very well, she barely managed to get out. But you and your warriors will be under armed escort at all times, and that is not negotiable. Giage bared his teeth in a predator's fierce grin. I would not have it any other way, Admiral, he said with reckless elan. Our shuttle will be within range in an hour's time. Looking forward to it, she shot back, as she flashed her own incisors in return. As the freak adrenaline surge began to fade, Nasat still had a question burning in his mind. Admiral, now that we have managed to avoid wholesale slaughter, for the moment, at least, may I please speak to my wife? He asked in much calmer tones. The Admiral regarded him silently for several long moments, before rising to her feet. Marshal Nasat, I regret to inform you that the Tetrarchy vessel Clara Barton was lost with all hands.